Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to customize this whale LPS vase. And I chose this one because its shape has always been bothering me a little bit, so I wanted to see what I can make with it. And I was a little bit inspired by the idea of whales being ancient creatures, so I want to make a stone whale, or a stone inspired whale I should say. And for that I'm starting out with fixing the facial shape and the jaw. And I'm using some references from some real life whales and just trying to round over things a little bit more. The ones that the LPS figures have looks a bit more like a beak shape in my opinion. So I wanted to just round everything out a little bit more, give it a more defined lower lip, and just overall make it look a bit more put together, if that makes sense. And because I've seen so many customizers use normal polymer clay, I wanted to try that too. And that's why I'm using Sculpey Medium here and just some Bacon Bond to adhere to the figure. Now the trick for baking this is apparently just go 10-15 degrees lower. I actually went 15 to 20 because my oven has direct heating elements and it tends to get decently hot, and then you bake it for a little longer than normal. Now I am a little bit worried because this is technically a vinyl head, this figure, except for the tail and the little fins on the side. And usually LPS only have this vinyl on the head, so it doesn't really touch anything. And I know this vinyl gets soft really quickly, so that's also why I chose a lower temperature. So let's hope that when I am finally finished with adding the jawline, that it will actually hold up well in the oven. But yeah, all I'm doing here is smoothing out all the edges as best as I can, and I'm using my silicone shaper to evenly add all the curves, always looking at my references roughly to see how it curves and how the eyes look. And I'm trying to make this as symmetrical as possible, which is actually a bit more difficult in this case because, you know, the face is a bit more sideways than frontal, so you cannot really directly compare the sides except for when you turn it. But I think I managed pretty well, and here's the baking result. It definitely got a little bit soft and warm, the tail bent down a little bit and so did the flippers, and yeah, the head actually flattened. I think the problem was that it was having direct contact to the baking tray. You can see it flattened, the entire body flattened a little bit. I think it doesn't really matter for this figure because I think it looks a bit more like it's underwater, you know, it's sitting deeper. But yeah, definitely a thing that I need to pay attention to in the future if I have other figures that have vinyl. Maybe I should actually put a layer of starch or something. Usually when you have polymer clay stuff and you don't want it to flatten in the oven, you can use a layer of starch or something in a container and sit it on top of that. Because the direct metal usually holds the heat better, maybe that will also help to avoid melting things. I will try that in the future, but for now I just lowered the temperature just a tiny bit more, and I can totally work with this. It is not completely ruined at all. I think it looks actually a bit more cute now that it sits a bit more flat. So, you know, we're going to just roll with it. Now for the little bumps on the forehead of the whale, since I'm going with this rock kind of thing, I wanted to add some little pebbles. So I just used some random blobs of clay, put them on the face and just, you know, worked on them a little bit with my silicone shaper, and I also textured them a little bit with aluminium foil later. And then I realized I forgot the ridges on the chin. So I put on another thin layer of clay, and then to make them a little bit softer, I'm actually using cling film here. This is a technique that lets the edges of the roofs that you add not be as harsh. It blends it in nicer, and it works really, really well. So that is what I'm using here, and I'm just trying to add some natural grooves. Kind of makes it look a little bit like tree bark or something, but I really like this texture. And after I smoothed everything out a little bit more, I as you can see, using just some crumpled up tinfoil, and this usually gives a nice rock texture. And then I realized, oh, I need to remove the star too. I probably should have done that after baking because I smushed my little grooves a bit, but it wasn't too bad. I just shaved it off with my knife very carefully because they had a soft and I wanted to make sure not to cut myself. And I really tried to keep the star fully because I think it's adorable, and I'm definitely wanting to use this for a future project. And then I just carefully sanded a little bit off the spot and realized I need to bake this first to like make sure that everything stays intact. And after baking, I removed the little fins because I didn't really like them. And then I used some wire and I just made new ones. And this sounds easy, but this is actually my third try. By the way, I actually removed them while the vinyl was still a bit soft, and it was super easy to just pull them out. So that worked surprisingly well. I thought I would have to cut them off, but luckily I didn't. Yeah, the wire is going to stabilize these thin pieces, and I just essentially pushed together two pieces of clay to get this form. Just a little bit more natural looking, but yeah, the first ones I made were a bit too chunky. The second ones I made didn't have the right angle, and these are the third ones where I finally got the angle of the wire and the size right, and yeah. The only problem I had with the clay being so soft is when I added them, first of all I had to poke some holes in there so the wire could fit in there nicely. And then when I pushed this in, the clay was so soft from me overworking it a little bit that, yeah. I smushed the fins a lot of times and I had to cover up the wire. In the end, after a little bit more back and forth, I got it to work. I think the best solution here would have been to put it in the fridge, but I was a little impatient, just to strengthen it. I think even putting a trolley in the freezer would have helped for the fins, flippers, whatever you want to call them, to stay intact and not move too much and stick on the wire. But I managed to texture them and work them really nicely so they look how I wanted them to. And then I spent some time carving and sanding, first of all the tail and of course the spot where we removed the sea star. So the tail had one issue, and that was that the different plastics interacted differently in the oven. So there was a huge wave or bulge that was really obvious on the connection point. So I kind of shaved that down. And then I also wanted to thin out the back tail end just a little bit more to make it look a bit more fittingly to this project. So I used my Dremel very carefully. And then I just used sanding sticks and buffers to fix that. And while I was at it, I also removed the eyes. This was actually out of necessity because I just could not find my acetone. And let me tell you guys, this was painful. Getting the paint off enough that I can paint it took so long. And yes, I still had a little bit in the crevices, but because there were not surfaces that I would touch or anything would rub on, it was fine. But yeah, it definitely took ages to sand. Gotta love acetone, but it works if you don't have acetone or don't want to use it. But it's definitely not as easy. And then it was finally time to paint. I was so excited for this. The sculpting was a bit harder, especially towards the end, so I was really looking forward to it. And I just, last time, used Mod Podge mixed with normal, acrylic paints, or in this case, model paints, to especially, coat the first two base layers. So I used, 2 or 3 base layers, and all of them had Mod Podge mixed into the paint, just to make sure that it sticks to the figure, and so far I had really good experiences with it, and it lasts, really well. And then I was like, hey, this is a rock, and, whales have patterns too, so let's try to do an underpainting and hope the colors show through. What I did not put into consideration is that Vallejo model paints are decently opaque, even if you, water them down, or very opaque in a lot of colors, so this didn't quite work. but I had fun to just paint these ridiculous blue and pink colors. So yeah, even though it didn't do much, you know, it wasn't too bad to do this. I also am using my heat gun in between steps just to dry it a bit quicker so that I don't have to waste paints, because model paints do dry quickly. So if I would wait for the figure to dry completely, the paint on the palette would also be dried, even though I'm mixing them with water constantly. I don't really like using a wet palette with these paints. I like to use them for like normal acrylics, but for these model paints I found that I like to control the consistency with water separately just a little bit better. But yeah, after everything was dried, I added like 2 coats of paint, like a lighter grey, and then I decided I need to go darker to like really get this like rock color. And then I just went in with a drier, smaller brush and I like stippled on ever-growing darker layers of grays. So I started with like a medium grey and then went darker and darker and just like random spots to like kind of get a pattern. And in the end I used a very dark, almost black tone to like stipple on to try and get this like nice, like varying gradient effect. And at this point, like, it looked really nice, but I was sad that I didn't have the like underpaint colors, because, you know, rocks have a lot of color variations. There's bluish undertones, there's reddish, there's yellow, and many more. It really depends like on the like minerals in them. So to replicate that, I just made like washes with the same paints that I used before, just adding a little bit yellow. And then I dabbed them off and, you know, that worked super well, surprisingly, and I really like this effect. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. And then to add a little bit more texture, I'm using a very dry brush and some white paint, and I'm like, I don't know, like sprinkling it on, I guess? Just with like holding the tip of the paintbrush in my fingers and like flicking it. And that adds a nice bit of variation and gradients, and then I'm using some dry brush to like really let all the details that I sculpted pop. You know, like all the like stone textures and stuff that I added with the tin foil on like the fins and on like the little pebbles on its nose and stuff. All those really profit from this, but I also added a little bit on the tail and stuff just to give it a little bit of like a highlight. And this was actually one of my favorite steps. This dry brushing really brings out a lot of the details way more, and it's just so easy and so much fun. All you need to do is just add a little bit of paint onto your palette, pick it up with a dry brush, and then just like, best is like if you wipe off even more of the excess on like a paper towel or something, and then use very little paint on your brush to like carefully brush it over your model. And after painting some of the white stuff, like on the neck part and such, it was time for the eyes. And I was really worried because these are quite large, and again, it's really hard to get symmetry if you cannot see the model like completely from the front. You have to go from both sides separately. So I wasn't too sure how this turned out, but this was definitely not the easiest eye painting I've ever done, and I've had to go like back and forth several times, I think like 6 times or so, to get like the right sizing on both sides. But for this one I decided to stick with the ocean color, since, you know, we have a lot of stone, but blue also really mixes well with these grey tones, and this whale is still an ocean or like whale or whatever. It's a fantasy creature, but it just made sense for me to like adhere to this theme a little bit and to try and make the eyes blue. The first blue tone looked really nice that I had, but it was a bit too dark, so when I added the black it just completely vanished. So I decided to go over it with some lighter blue tones as highlight to like separate the lines. And again, this was a ton of back and forth. I am super happy with the result. I just wish that it would have worked first try. But at least the fixes weren't too problematic. I just used like really, really thin paintbrushes to like go over all the areas again and again and again. The last really tricky part was the highlight. Again, because I cannot really see both sides at the same time. I actually smudged the other side while trying to hold onto the face while playing these, and it made me super sad. But I managed to fix it luckily. But this was by far the trickiest time of adding highlights. I had to go back and forth so many times, place them in a different spot so they would look even, repaint them, and then after they were dried I went back around the edges of the smudged ones and just painted them in the corresponding background colors again so they would have their shape back, like mainly black in this case. But yeah, this was surprisingly difficult. And then I smudged the other side and had to fix that again, and I dried it, and I don't know, I let it dry for like a couple hours before I applied varnish later, but they didn't fully dry. I guess I used too much white paint. Also, this is not model paint, this is just normal acrylic, which I think was the problem because I underestimated how long it actually takes to dry, especially in like a thicker layer. But yeah, the only other thing I added for detail was a little bit of grey wash for the chin part, so that it like the chin and the belly would like pop a little bit more with the grooves and blend in a bit more into the rest of the body. And then I mixed some Mod Podge with some moss, and this is just like fake moss that is like sponge moss, if that makes sense. And I'm just dabbing it all over, and because it's like colored with water-based colors, the colors actually smudge a little bit, which is precisely what I wanted, and which is why I like smudge the moss on with my fingers and place them in like a lot of different like spaces where it just would make sense logically. And then I applied like 3 good coats of this matte varnish, which works excellently so far. I've been using it for like a lot of my last projects and it's so nice. It did give the eyes a little bit of a haze, like a white layer, but I think that just because I actually applied it a little bit too thick, but I was totally fine with it because I think it actually matched the vibe of the rocks a bit more. And then after the varnish was fully dried, I could use like a very thin layer, very carefully applied of clear nail polish. And this is just any clear nail lacquer, nail polish, top coat, whatever. But you need to be really careful that you don't agitate the layers below too much. So just like carefully going over the area with one application is strike. And also you need a heavy dose of varnish on the eyes beforehand, or else you're gonna smudge and loosen all your underlying paint and you essentially ruined your figure and have to repaint the eyes again. But if you do it right, it gives a beautiful shine, and it's just a bit better in my opinion than UV varnish, because UV varnish or UV resin tends to yellow over time. I noticed that no matter which brand, especially if you have them sitting out on a windowsill or something. While with nail varnish, so far I didn't have any issues with that, and I've been using nail varnish for years now. But yeah, here's the finished figure, and I am just in love with it. I love this little guy. I love the vibe it gives. It definitely has like a starry, stony vibe, but it also looks really, really cute. It almost gives like baby whale with the big eyes, and I just love the upgraded chin shape. I think this fits so much better because the shape before just made me not like this figure. But now it actually became one of my favorite customs. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this project, and let me know which kind of creature or which kind of theme you would have chosen with this base. And as always, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!